So speaking of KD Davis, he's on our All-Texas college football teams. We're going to get the first team up there here in a second. Let me just go through the superlatives as well. So not only do we do a first team and a second team, but we also pick a best of at each position.
Yes.
Best quarterback, we picked Clayton Tune from Houston. Best running back, Bijan Robinson from Texas. Best receiver, Tank Dell, Nathaniel Dell from Houston. Best offensive lineman, Connor Galvin from Baylor. Best defensive lineman, Siaka Ika. Defensive tackle from Baylor. 2 Baylor Bears there as offensive lineman, defensive lineman. That's a good sign.
Not
for
a surprise.
Yeah, not a surprise, but a really good sign for Baylor and what they're doing moving forward. KD Davis, as we mentioned, best linebacker there at North Texas. Antonio Johnson, best defensive back from Texas A&M, and then Austin McNamara got best special teams. He's an incredible punter out at Texas Tech. So those were kind of the big names there on that first team all-state list. If you look at the whole list, Texas A&M for the second straight year kind of led the way. Last year they led with 10 players. This year with 8. I think 5 on the first team. Bryce Foster, Antonio Johnson, as we mentioned, Edrin Cooper, a linebacker that I think is going to have a huge sophomore year. Antonio Johnson, we mentioned. Anaya Smith, I think, is the name that I forgot there, a utility guy who plays wide receiver. We'll play a little bit more running back this year as well without Isaiah Spiller. So A&M, still the most talented team in the state. Number 2, we have Houston. Houston has 6 players on the all-college team, so that kind of shows kind of the expectations there at Houston. And then again, as we mentioned, we're having Javi Cardenas on later on the show to talk UTSA. UTSA was 3rd on that list with 5, and I promise that wasn't a homerish homerish thing I did. Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot Ish's bit there.
Yeah.
You want to throw up second team?
Yeah, second team.
There it is.
So some more Aggies, some more, so we got every single team is represented. All 12 FBS teams are represented. And then I think a thing that Shahan did last year that I really liked was he found a spot for an FCS player. Last year it was Eric Schmid from Sam Houston, the quarterback, after leading them to a national title. I think that was deserving. And I love the idea to who is the best FCS player? Let's find him a spot. To me, the best FCS player in state this year is Xavier Gibson, wide receiver at Stephen F. Austin. He finished 7th last year in the Walter Payton Award voting, and for those who don't know, that's kind of like the Heisman of FCS. So I think big year coming from SFA, and I'm glad that he was able to find a spot on the list because wide receiver is tough.
Yeah.
As Powers was talking about, that recruiting trickles up, right? And wide receiver is probably the most loaded position in this state, so finding him a spot was great.
Yeah. Now, before we move on from talking about the All-Texas College, I got a couple questions for you that I wanted to ask. Who do you think was the toughest decision to put on the first team?
Yeah, so for me, the toughest spot was quarterback because in my mind, there are 3 really, really, really good quarterbacks in this state this year going into the year that deserve this kind of recognition. You have Clayton Tune at Houston, Tanner Mordecai at SMU, who got second team, and then there's Frank Harris at UTSA, who led UTSA to their first conference championship, who was a big-time money player for them last year. We named him our offensive player of the year last year, and he's not even on one of the first 2 teams. So, and being a UTSA guy, I knew I was going to get some flack for that one. But when all 3 are kind of equal, to me, all you can do is go by numbers and statistics. And
right.
Clayton Tune threw 36 touchdowns. Tanner Mordecai threw for 4,000 plus yards, so those guys' stats were just bigger and bigger. Some of that is the offense they play in. Tanner Mordecai played for Sonny Dykes, an air raid spread, pass the ball around guy. Clayton Tune plays for Dana Holgerson, an air raid, spread the ball around, pass. Frank Harris had Sincere McCormick, and UTSA is a little bit more run-pass even there. So I don't think he's able to put the numbers up. But I believe if there's a guy I look back on later in the year, I'm like, I messed that one up, it would be Frank Harris. I wish we could have had 3 spots for quarterback.
Right. And kind of speaking of that, what was the easiest position to kind of figure out to put on the first, I guess, and second team?
Yeah, I think the easiest position was probably wide receiver because there's just so many options, like we mentioned, like Zachary Franklin at UTSA, Xavier Worthy at Texas, Tank Dell at Houston, and I haven't even mentioned Quentin Johnston at TCU, who's a first-team All-Big 12 guy, right? So wide receiver was a position where there was almost too many options. The easiest singular decision was Bijan Robinson
For sure.
Right? Like,
For sure.
it was like just pencil that one in. Probably running back on first team, like Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane, clearing away the top two guys. So running back on the first team was pretty easy, and then finding 6-7 wide receivers was pretty easy as well. And that's why both utility guys are wide receivers. And Nia Smith and Xavier Gibson wide receivers. So really we got 8 All-State wide receivers on the list. So,
and you kind of already mentioned this, but what was like the biggest omission for you? Was it Frank Harris at that quarterback spot?
I think with Frank Harris, I have an excuse.
Yeah.
There's like, hey, like, look at these other two guys. Like, they were just as deserving. Like, who do I leave off? Like, I was going to get flagged. I think the guy that I maybe undersell a little bit that the more and more time went on is Layden Robinson, the guard at Texas A&M. People are getting really high on him. He's starting to get a big push into being preseason All-SEC. People are talking about him being a first, second, third round draft pick next year. So I think if there's a guy who I look back on at the end of the year and I'm like, how did I not put him on the list? To me, that's going to be Layden Robinson at Texas A&M. But there was already, with Bryce Foster, Ruben Fothery, there's already 2 Texas A&M guys on there.
Yeah.
And I think a thing about our list that makes it unique is we're not just picking the flat-out best players. It's not an NFL draft.
Right.
Right? Like, we have 12 FBS programs to cover. We want to
include
spread that
them all.
around.
Exactly.
That's
what people don't understand.
When you're judging a UTEP defensive end versus a Texas A&M defensive end, of course the Texas A&M one probably is higher level talent, but which one's better for their conference? Like,
exactly.
Group to group, right? It's like looking at 2A versus 6A. Maybe the 2A quarterback isn't as good as the 6A quarterback, but he dominates 2A more so than that quarterback dominates 6A.
Yeah.
So it's taking those things into account, not trying to hype one team into the other. Texas A&M coming off an 8-4 season. I don't know who their quarterback is going to be. I don't think that they're a top 10 team in the country. I didn't want to have it too Aggie-centric.
Hot take.
I think Layden Robinson's probably the best player that was left off that list.
Yeah, I like that. Now I'm going to put you kind of on the spot here. If you are looking into the future, so this would be this. So this is kind of the 2021 All Texas College team, right? If you're looking at the 2022 All Texas College team, you're talking to Mike in about a year. Who can you see on that list? And you don't have to name every single person, but like, who are a couple of players you're going to watch out for to put on that list this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy who's going to be on it next year who wasn't on it this year is Alton Mccaskill.
That's a great,
the running back from Houston.
Idea.
Because I mean, he was on the list. Like, I'll be out front with everybody. I made this in like late April. And like we didn't go to press until June. And so I was able to kind of go back and tweak it a little bit after talking to more people. But what happened in between Alton Mccaskill getting put on the original list and the magazine going out is he tore his ACL.
Right.
And so can you put a guy on the list if he's going to miss 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe the whole season? I don't know. I could. I didn't think I should, right?
Yeah.
But when he gets back and Bijan Robinson's gone, Devon Achane is gone, Alton Mccaskill is going to be the best running back in the state. He's the most talented running back in the state, after those guys. And so I think he's a guy who, just looking at the list, is like, okay, he deserves to be on it, but circumstance kept him off.
For sure.